To learn from history, one must first learn history. As a child, I dismissed history as a string of meaningless numbers, dates I was expected to memorize for no clear reason. Later, when I opened a history book, I discovered it was genuinely interesting. Those same dates suddenly became meaningful in context. More importantly, understanding history allows us to cut through the hyperbole of flawed ideologies and draw informed conclusions. It also helps us recognize counterfeit history presented by those with an agenda. That's why knowing the basics of the Mexican-American War matters. Some claim the United States stole its western territories from Mexico, often without realizing there was a war, a treaty, or substantial financial compensation involved. Let's revisit the key dates. April 1846 to February 1848, the Mexican-American War. The revisionist narrative. A modern narrative claims the United States stole vast territories from Mexico through deceitful aggression. This version routinely ignores the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ended the war and formalized the land transfer. The narrative is designed to appeal to those unfamiliar with historical context or who favor sensationalism over fact. True history, treaties, financial compensation, and geopolitical realities clarifies the record. It's like being accused of stealing a house you legally bought and fully paid for. Consider three facts. 1. The transfer of land was legally formalized. 2. Compensation was paid. 3. The outcome followed historical norms for border changes. Mexico's claims. Before understanding U.S. acquisition, consider Mexico's claim. The lands now comprising California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming were originally Spanish colonies, acquired through conquest of indigenous peoples. Mexico inherited these northern provinces in 1821, but controlled them weakly. Fewer than 100,000 Mexican citizens lived there, while native groups, including the Apache, Navajo, and Comanche, dominated much of the territory. Meanwhile, Mexico struggled with civil wars, political instability, and economic collapse. In the 1820s, Mexico invited U.S. settlers into Texas to serve as a buffer against native raids. When conflicts arose over governance and slavery, abolished by Mexico in 1829, Texas declared independence in 1836. Though Mexico never formally recognized it, the U.S. annexed Texas in 1845, escalating border disputes. Mexico's claims were themselves inherited from a colonial power, no more original than any other empires. Mexico gained the land from Spain in 1821 and sold it to the United States just 27 years later. The Mexican-American War. War broke out in 1846 after a border clash along the Rio Grande. The U.S. recognized the Rio Grande as Texas's southern border. Mexico claimed the Nueces River. Congress declared war after Mexican forces attacked U.S. troops. While critics, including Abraham Lincoln, labeled it unjust, it was still a declared war between sovereign nations, following 19th century norms for resolving territorial disputes. President James K. Polk, an unapologetic expansionist, sought California and New Mexico openly. U.S. forces under Generals Zachary Taylor and Winfield Scott captured Mexico City by 1847. Rather than annex all of Mexico, a debated proposal, the U.S. pursued peace. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, 1848, transferred about 525,000 square miles, roughly 55% of Mexico's pre-war territory, in exchange for $15 million, about $580 million today, plus assumption of $3.25 million in Mexican debts. At roughly 5 cents per acre, the price was similar to the Louisiana and Alaska purchases. The treaty offered Mexican residents U.S. citizenship or the option to relocate. Over 90% chose to remain. Land grants were to be honored, though later legal challenges undermined some claims. These grievances are real, but do not equal theft. Both governments ratified the treaty. The U.S. Senate 38-14, Mexico's Congress pragmatically to stabilize finances. Post-war consequences. In 1853, Mexico voluntarily sold another 30,000 square miles, southern Arizona and New Mexico, via the Gadsden Purchase for $10 million to facilitate a southern railroad. This was a straightforward, consensual transaction, demonstrating continued diplomacy rather than coercion. At the time, no one considered the territories stolen. Borders have historically shifted via war and treaty. Even the U.S. lost territory to Britain in 1783, and Mexico had taken land from Spain. Retroactively applying modern moral frameworks would render almost every historical border illegitimate. Native Americans, the true original inhabitants, were displaced by Spanish, Mexican, and U.S. expansion alike, complicating simplistic narratives of victim and perpetrator. Why the theft narrative persists. Critics cite U.S. expansionism, failed purchase offers, the Thornton Affair, and post-treaty legal injustices. Some points have merit, but a ratified treaty with compensation is not theft. While Ulysses S. Grant called it one of the most unjust wars ever waged, moral debates do not negate legality. California residents often welcomed U.S. rule amid Mexico's instability. Leaders like Mariano Vallejo saw annexation as a path to stability and economic growth. Conclusion: a legitimate acquisition. The Western states were ceded legally, with compensation and citizenship protections. Calling it stolen ignores historical context, legal formalities, and 19th century geopolitical norms. Understanding this complexity fosters informed dialogue rather than ideological myth-making. The gold rush strengthened U.S. control, but it occurred after the treaty, not before.